Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Victory. Before we continue, this is a personalized limited edition of Victory with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Victory is a novel written by Joseph Conrad and published in 1915. Conrad himself didn't consider the novel his best work and was somewhat disappointed with how it turned out, but it brought him commercial success, gave him the so desired financial independence, and above all made him a well-known writer. Victory was adapted into cinema various times, the first one being a silent movie produced in 1919, which I think you can find on YouTube. It was the first adaptation of any of Conrad's novels and the only one made during his life. But my favorite is the 1995 version starring Willem Dafoe and Irene Jacob, which I have seen a couple of times in the past, but lately cannot find it anywhere. Anyway, Joseph Conrad was a sailor for the first part of his life, and most of his writings are based on his experiences on the sea and the stories he heard during his voyages. He was also not a native English speaker, and it can be seen in his somewhat exotic prose structure. I myself enjoy it and connect with it. It might be because I am a native Polish speaker just like he was, and I can see how he tried to adapt the creative advantages of the Slavic grammatical form into written English. Further, I consider Conrad to be a great psychologist, as good as Dostoevsky, and I appreciate his fascination with the human nature, specifically his attempts at understanding its dark side. What is Victory about? It is about the difficulties and limitations of personal change and the conflict between society and individual, and how all this struggle creates the need for isolation, which often results in detachment from the world. But at the same time, the book implies that there is instinctive want of company, and how all these contradictory feelings and needs impact and confuse interhuman relations. I think it is best relayed in this excerpt from the book. The girl he had come across, of whom he had possessed himself, to whose presence he was not yet accustomed, with whom he did not yet know how to live, that human being so near and still so strange, gave him a greater sense of his own reality than he had ever known in all his life. So the grand message or idea of the book seems to be that we can get used to or accept our physical circumstances, but our emotional needs cannot be killed, only put to sleep, and they can be easily awakened by incidental exterior stimuli. Now, a bit of the plot. I will be vague as usual and give you some idea of the flow of the story, but at the same time I will do my best to avoid spoiling any surprises. The narrative takes place at the end of the 19th century in Indonesia, which back then was a Dutch colony called Dutch East India, and the location moves between the town of Surabaya and a small island in the Java Sea. Behind me is a wooden schooner similar to the ones cruising between the islands in the Java Sea in the 19th century, so I thought it was appropriate to use it as the background for this review. There are a few principal individuals that form the foundation of the story. The main character is Axel Heist, a Swedish aristocrat raised in London by his widowed, emotionally cold and controlling father, and Lina, a young performer in the traveling music group. Then there is a trio of scoundrels which consists of Mr. Jones, an English gentleman and the brain of the gang, Martin, who executes plans fabricated by Mr. Jones, and Pedro, who seems to be there to do anything the other two want or are unwilling to do. Then there is Wang, Hast's Chinese servant, and Schomburg, the owner of the hotel in Surabaya, who is somewhat of an architect and responsible for the creation of the whole tragic drama that develops on the island. The book starts giving us a little background information about Hast. After wandering aimlessly in the world, he ends up in Southeast Asia, where he meets a trader named Morrison, and together they set up a coal company on a small island. Unfortunately, Morrison dies, the company goes under, and Hast finds himself living a reclusive existence on the island with his eccentric Chinese servant Wang. While visiting Surabaya, Hast meets Lina, a performer in a traveling band, somewhat enslaved by its owner and desperate to escape. So Hast, mostly out of pity, and also a bit manipulated by the girl to feel some guilt and responsibility, quietly takes her to his island. Schomburg, who was sexually interested in Lina, becomes enraged and swears to revenge himself. He tells the three scoundrels staying in his hotel about the supposed wealth hidden by Hast on the island. So in hope of easy riches, the trio sails to the island with the plan and hope of finding the treasure, with Hast's help and if necessary killing him. "Willful murder?" says he in his quiet way. "What the deuce is that? What are you talking about? People do get killed sometimes when they get in one's way, but that's self-defense, you understand." But Schomburg, while giving the most of the details, didn't mention the girl, and she becomes a surprise they didn't expect. And this creates an uncomfortable and dangerous situation between all the men, which leads to a rather tragic finish. And that's the basic plot. Now, what are my thoughts about Victory? I enjoy reading it, and it is one of my favorite Conrad's novels. In general, I like all characters created by him. They are complex and profound and very flawed, existing in a neutral void between good and evil, but being pushed by the circumstances into one or the other. What captivated my fancy was that I, Axel Hast, the most detached of creatures in this earthly captivity, the veriest tramp on this earth, an indifferent stroller going through the world's bustle, that I should have been there to step into the situation of an agent of providence, I, a man of universal scorn and unbelief. All of their imperfections and weaknesses make them very human and very real, and because of it, it is possible to create a deep connection with them. On the surface, Victory can be seen as a love tale fighting for survival and struggling with both good and evil, Conradian Romeo and Juliet, but the story is so much more complex than that. It is about fluidity and conditionality of human feelings, reactions, behaviors, and morality. And that is not a punishment or the end, but a natural continuation of events. I like to read about how people deal with isolation and loneliness, perhaps not so much physically, but psychologically, since it is either present or just around the corner in everyone's life. Conrad insists that once you peel off all the superficial layers, all you are left with is the feeling of being alone. And I agree. I know at one time or another we all try to convince ourselves that this is not the case, but perhaps our effort is nothing more than denial of sad, dark, and somewhat scary reality. Conrad seems to imply that we should just accept it and get maybe not the best, but whatever we can out of it. Formerly, in solitude and in silence, he had been used to think clearly and sometimes even profoundly, seeing life outside the flattering optical delusion of everlasting hope, of conventional self-deception, of an ever-expected happiness. It is difficult to define Victory's literary style, since it is as vague and confusing as the rest of Conrad's works. The book seems to be floating somewhere between the end of the Victorian Romanticism and the beginning of the literary modernism, and it can be labeled as an adventure tale, love story, psychological thriller, or character study. To me, it blends it all together to make a complicated and fascinating work of literature. But above all, it is the body of perplexing individuals that I find most interesting. There are 5 central characters. On one side there is Haste and Lina, on the other there is Mr. Jones and Pedro, and then there is Martin, who seems to be in the middle, a bit confused and kind of drifting between the two banks. And in the certain parts of the book, it is he who seems to be central to the whole narration. It is his individualism, detachment, and eccentricism that make him so fascinating, and all of it is brought about by the complex relationship with his father, long dead, but still present visually in the painting on the wall and psychologically in Hayes' reflections. And he still seems to be living in his father's shadow and follows his advice. Hayes traveled extensively, but he doesn't come across as a traveler, but rather a searcher. And once he finds what he's looking for, which seems to be solitude and isolation from the society, he stays put. His travels were a psychological escape, and he represents our instinct to avoid emotional suffering and all the inner conflicts that come with doing so. It was the very essence of his life to be a solitary achievement, accomplished not by hermit-like withdrawal with its silence and immobility, but by a system of restless wandering, by the detachment of an impermanent dweller amongst changing scenes. In this scheme he had perceived the means of passing through life without suffering and almost without a single care in the world, invulnerable because elusive. But he is somewhat aware and curious about what he is missing when he says, "To slay, to love, the greatest enterprises of life upon a man, and I have no experience of either." Haste built a defensive wall around himself and is visibly so disconnected and unapproachable that others cannot comprehend him. They try to judge him according to their own rules and standards, and because of it they make erroneous conclusions and fail. Well, Lina makes some progress, but only because Hayes opens up and talks to her about his life. And even so, her understanding of him is limited. She herself is a pleasurable and good, but destructive force, directly responsible for all that transpired. She deals with her own dark ghosts from the past, but there is a certain cleanliness and even purity in her, made visible by Haste, and she is grateful for that and feels some loyalty toward him. The group of scoundrels is brought to the island by Lina's action, unintentionally, but she feels some responsibility for it and wants to make things right. Of the 3 men, the most dangerous is Gentleman Jones, who is a deeply perverse character and symbolizes the materialization of evil. Even his physical appearance is portrayed as disgusting. His intentions and actions are all atrocious, and he is guided by bad reasons and twisted logic to achieve his aims. Ricardo, on the other hand, shows that under right circumstances, there is some possibility or willingness for redemption, even though it is self-serving and paid for by the others. He is rebellious and ambitious, waiting for the right opportunity. And Pedro is rather transparent, animal-like brute, guided more by his instinct than feelings and reasons, and blindly follows his master. I would say that 3 represent 3 different levels of evil. There are other intriguing characters, not central to the story, but indispensable to the plot. Wang, who distrusts and is suspicious of all white people and likes to keep his distance from them. Schomburg, who is driven by envy and bitterness, And also Mrs. Schomburg, who knows her martial situation is far from perfect, but she feels it is the best she can get and is willing to do what's necessary to protect it. Then there is the title, Victory. What does it mean? It is as ambiguous as the rest of the book, and Conrad leaves it for the reader to interpret it. For me, it is Hayes' victory over himself and Lina's victory over the rest. It can be even argued that it was Wang, Schomburg, and Mrs. Schomburg who were the final victors and received what they were after: freedom, revenge, and status quo. Perhaps the victory is not over anything specific, but over the general struggle between the inner emotions and conflicts. And on the more morbid side, it could be death, because in the end, it is always victorious. To sum it up, Victory is a complex work, maybe the most complex of all Conrad's novels, but it is a good read. His mastery of English writing is nothing less than impressive. The beautiful prose and unique way Conrad creates descriptions and structures dialogues is what I really enjoyed. His mind, cool, alert, watched it sink there with a sort of vague concern at the absurdity of the occupation, till it rested at the bottom, deep down where our unexpressed longings lie. As I mentioned before, the book is rather vague and leaves plenty of room for interpretations and will make you often question what you just read. So if you are into well-defined action with clear outcome, this might not be a novel for you. Also, Victory is not considered by some to be between Conrad's best works, but remember, you read it alone, so you might as well be the sole judge of it. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transform into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tannery in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I design the cover, and I use this painting of a volcano exploding on a tropical island. And for me, it represents the volcano in the middle of Hayes Island, laying dormant in the background, but it could explode unexpectedly at any moment, kind of like Hayes' life did. This is the back with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on my PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze, or you might lose. Well, this is it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.